Hey everybody, my name is Paul Esden Jr., aka Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com. And first off, thanks for stopping by my YouTube channel. Make sure before you go any further, hit the subscribe button for all the latest and greatest in all things New York Jets content. YouTube.com/BoyGreen25. We got a phenomenal guest here on the show. We've had a little bit of a hiatus, a little bit of a summer break. It's time to get back, and there's a perfect guy to get back with today here on the show, and that man is Eric Moody. He is the senior fantasy analyst at ProFootballNetwork.com. Thanks for joining us, Eric.
No, I appreciate the invite. As I always say, anytime someone wants to chat about fantasy football, hey, I'm always down for that. So looking forward to the conversation and also diving a little bit deeper into this New York Jets football team.
Let's do that because, for folks who don't know, all over this YouTube channel is New York Jets content. Normally I'm interviewing famous people talking about Jets, but, we haven't talked about any fantasy football here in a while, and for obvious good reason, there's been no reason to talk about Jets and fantasy football in the same sentence, so I am pleased as a Jets guy and a diehard fantasy football guy to combine those two things together here today. Eric, it is a strange world out there where I'm reading fantasy football content, articles, podcasts, everything, and they're like, yeah, the Jets could make sense in this round. I'm like, what? So let's try to dive in a little bit on that, and we'll start with some of the rookies that are intriguing. And the one that I'm hearing get a lot of hubbub is Michael Carter, the fourth-round running back out of North Carolina. The Jets don't seem to have the guy on the roster, which a lot of people are pointing at saying maybe Michael Carter can be the guy. What are your fantasy thoughts on Michael Carter being an option this year?
Yeah, I'm really high on Michael Carter, and I was very high on him in the draft process. And on the surface, you think, okay, he's with the Jets, but still, hey, the opportunity's there for a taking. I'm like, you look at Michael Carter. I'm like, this is a guy. He accumulated 1,512 total yards on 187 opportunities last season for the Tar Heels. And he was part of a committee with Javonte Williams. But I think when you look at the type of season that Williams had, I think Carter, was kind of overshadowed by him. But he does have a tremendous, statistical body of work at UNC. Like he finished fourth in school history with 3,404 career rushing yards. So if you look at it from a fantasy lens and what could happen with his outlook with the Jets, I believe he'll be splitting time like of Tevin Coleman. I think they could easily see between both backs like anywhere from 140 to 150 opportunities. Like the Jets have 216 unaccounted rushing attempts going into this season, but he's generating a lot of positive buzz, which is a good thing. And I think he'll have a phenomenal rookie season.
Now, what do you think value-wise? So I'm a big redraft league guy. That's kind of where I dabble. Where is the proper value for Michael Carter? Because now as we're getting here in the middle of July, as we work our way through fantasy football draft season for everybody here over the next calendar month and a half here, where does the value make sense for a guy like Michael Carter?
Yeah, no, really, really good question. I'm like, you're looking at a player's average draft position, where they're going. I really like targeting Carter as like a running back 4. He does have significant upside, and if you were sitting there thinking, okay, I want to prioritize someone in this Jets backfield, if I'm looking at Tevin Coleman or if I'm looking at Michael Carter, Michael Carter is my preferred option. I think it's a scenario as the season goes on that he can have a stranglehold on the opportunity share in that backfield as the season progresses. So Michael Carter is a guy for me.
All right, let's go over to wide receiver. I don't know if there's been a more hyped guy since the Big Bang. Like, I don't know if a human being has been more hyped up than Elijah Moore has been hyped up among Jet fans and reporters sharing clips of this video and that video. And then thus the fantasy community looking at the Jets going, wait a second, is there something here with Elijah Moore? And similarly, the Jets have a lot of different pieces. There doesn't seem to be an alpha at wide receiver. There's Corey Davis. There's a little Denzel Mims. There's a little Jamison Crowder has been the leading receiver the last couple of years, and that's not saying much for what's been there. But Elijah Moore, where does he fit into the mix? Because there is a lot of hype. Does the hype meet the reality? Is he a legitimate fantasy option this year, considering, well, quite frankly, he's on the Jets?
Yeah, I would say Elijah Moore. Again, he's another player that I'm really high on and fascinated with in fantasy football going into this year. Because again, just like at the running back position, the opportunity is there for the taking. And I think if you look at a guy like Elijah Moore, I think he has the potential to be the second most targeted receiver for the Jets this year. You're looking at a guy that could easily see anywhere from 95, to 100 targets. I'm like, if you look at what he was able to do at Ole Miss, I'm like, he finished his career tied for the third most receptions in school history with 189, like number 4 in receiving yards with 2,441. Number 6 with 16 receiving touchdowns. I'm like, this is a guy, get this. This is a guy, only Ole Miss player in school history with 3 games with 200 or more receiving yards, and all 3 happen to take place in 2020. I think he's very viable in the slot. He's definitely going to cut into Jamison Crowder's volume because a guy like Crowder, if someone's wondering about him, I'm like, he's really only projected to see around like 80 to 85 targets tops. But I think a guy like Moore could easily exceed, that projection that I have in place for him right now. You look at Corey Davis, with his statistical body of work, he just hasn't been consistent throughout his career. So again, the main takeaway with Moore, the opportunity is there for the taking, and he is going to be the less expensive option amongst the Jet receivers this year.
Let's take a quick detour on Corey Davis because he's an interesting guy. Again, a
Yeah.
guy that I don't think anyone believes he's a number one. Maybe Corey Davis does, which is good for him. Somebody's got to. But when you look at Corey Davis, can he reach that next level? Because they think with this offensive system that's coming over, which is like San Francisco on the East Coast, that he's the guy with play action and physical, tough contested catches and that sort of thing. Can he be an option potentially for people? And how high of an option should he be considered among all the wide receivers in football?
Yeah, I'm like with Corey Davis, I'm like, he's an option. I just think of what we saw from him last season. That's really what he's going to be with the Jets. And like you're looking at a guy who's a wide receiver 3. I know he had his best statistical season last year as a pro, 65 receptions, for 984 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns. It's really just hard for me personally to see, I guess, Corey Davis really becoming like a fantasy stud. Where you got a guy like Zach Wilson coming in, he's getting acclimated to the NFL game, and he's got other options there like Elijah Moore and Jamison Crowder. So I really just don't see it with Davis this year.
All right, let's talk about the quarterback. You brought him up. We're talking quarterbacks here. New York Jets quarterback Zach Wilson. He's the guy, the number 2 overall pick, and there's a lot of sexiness, a lot of hype here potentially for Zach Wilson. What do you think? Projecting Zach Wilson, which obviously can be difficult, and now we have the biggest NFL season ever with 17 games and that moving forward. What are the projections for Zach Wilson? What could we see?
With a guy like Wilson, it is interesting as you're going through that. I'm thinking about all the different, memes and GIFs and things that are out there, about Wilson as you're going through that. I would say to answer your question, like from a projection lens, I'm like, you're looking at around like 530 pass attempts, 3,800 passing yards, like 20 touchdowns and like 13 interceptions. So from a fantasy perspective, you're looking at like a low end QB2. Now, I know that Wilson had a historic season in 2020 at BYU. I'm like, he threw a ton of touchdowns, like his passing yardage that he put together in 2020 ranks like 16th in BYU history. I just think for a guy like Wilson, it is going to take some time for him to get acclimated to the NFL game. It may take a season or 2. So I can easily see them leaning more like on the running game with Michael Carter, Tevin Coleman and others just to get him brought up to speed. But he will have some big games. I just think for Wilson, we're not really going to see everything come to fruition for him until like 2022 or 2023.
And I'll do a quick follow-up here on Wilson, but to your stat projection, right? That 3,800 yards. What was the touchdowns that you had there?
It was around 20. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll say 20 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. That's about right.
And the point is that, right, that's just, sure, those are just numbers to you. For Jets people, if you look at the Jets history books, like, phenomenal. Top 5 season. What? It just doesn't say a lot about what has happened with the Jets previously. But that's the thing that I was analyzing as we're working our way through the season and seeing similar projections to what you just said. And then I just put those projections here and I looked up at the history books and I'm like, oh my God, that's like the 3rd greatest season in Jets history. And it's like, again, somewhat disturbing because it speaks to the crappiness that's been there for the last 50 plus years. But on the other side, you're like, wow, there's something interesting there. I want to ask you about this. So here's the thing. The Jets corners are god-awful. It's inexperience all over the place, which leads me to believe that I think the Jets want to run the football. They want to get back to those ground and pound days and have that as a base and let Zach Wilson use play action off of that. But I think, unfortunately, because the Jets corners suck, as we just talked about, all of a sudden they're going to be like, oh, ditch that game plan. Time to chuck it all over the ball yard. And I don't know if that would necessarily be a good thing. Throwing more, I guess, would be good, but that could also put him in some risky situations. Is that all a factor potentially with Zach Wilson as a high upside, as you said, QB2, as someone that you throw a dart on at the end of the draft or even an undrafted free agency post-fantasy football draft? Say, you know what, I'll take a flyer and see what happens.
Yeah, no, I like the way you're thinking because, yeah, he's more of a quarterback I would want to take a flyer on, like if I'm in a super flex or 2 QB format, like as my QB3. Because if you look at his ADP or average draft position, I'm like, he's relatively inexpensive, essentially free in drafts. So he's a really good target as like a QB3, for where the bye weeks start coming around, where you need to plug him in as your QB2. I think he could be a good investment at that point.
All right, before we move on, because I want to talk again, I am a diehard fantasy football fan, and since I have, the greatest of all experts here on the show, I want to dive in those waters. But before we move on to all that, are there any other New York Jets fantasy nuggets, a relative player, or anything on this roster that is worth mentioning to all the diehard Jets fans, viewers, and listeners that are watching right now? Is there anywhere else that you just mention a nugget before we move on to the rest of the NFL?
Yeah, I would just say I was thinking about that as you were going through that question. It's like, really your most fantasy relevant pieces, are going to be Zach Wilson, Michael Carter, Tevin Coleman, depending on the depth of your league. Jamison Crowder, it's just very limited upside. And if he's not getting the targets, it's just, he's not really someone I'm prioritizing in drafts. I'm like, if you're sitting there thinking, well, Eric, what about Denzel Mims, Keelan Cole, or Braxton Berrios? To be candid, I'd be surprised if those guys accumulate more than 100 combined targets. Now, I know there's somebody out there that's thinking, well, what about Chris Herndon and Ryan Griffin? I know they're out there thinking that. I know you are. I'm looking at you right now. I would say for Herndon, I'm like, the guy continues to face roadblocks and kind of breaking out for fantasy managers. Again, if you're looking at those two tight ends, I don't think they'll exceed more than 75 combined targets. So there we have it.
I will say that since you brought it up, I don't know if you've met the person, but you just now have. I'm the biggest Chris Herndon fan on the planet. And I will be honest, I want to replay the clip, but I'll just say it. I said heading into last year, wow, Chris Herndon's going to emerge as one of the best young tight ends in all of football. And people are like, yeah. And unfortunately, I've had a lot of fans come back at me and said, man, you blew my draft. I listened to you. And I'm sure you get that a lot when you give advice and articles and everything. They come back and say, man, you blew my league, man. So, again, I'm doubling or nothing because I guess there's nowhere else to go, but just to dive on in my case, my Herndon bomb and hope eventually it blows up for me in a good way. But yeah, again, I just, the pieces aren't coming together. You mentioned it beautifully. Roadblocks. It's just every time I think it's going to pop, there's something else. But I'm hoping with the new offense and something, I'm just being optimistic that hopefully something can happen here in a contract year.
Oh, yeah.
So, again, just want to get that on the Chris Herndon stuff. Let's get into everything else. For all the other just fantasy football fans that are tuning into this right now, to get you ready for, again, all your redraft leagues coming up this fall, do you have, as we work our way through this, any favorite sleepers? Just regardless, anywhere. It's a generic question every fantasy analyst is asked all the time. Do you have favorite guys you're like, oh, yeah, when I'm looking at the draft, this is a guy I'm writing down? Who are some favorite sleepers?
Yeah, I would say just off the top of my head, I'm like, if you're looking at quarterback, the New York Giants quarterback, Daniel Jones, is getting a lot of he's not getting enough attention. I just can't stress enough, like, how a player develops, like, from his rookie season to his second season and then on to his third. And if you look at last year with COVID-19, the pandemic, it really rattled a lot of our progression from rookies, from the previous year's class. And so they've surrounded Jones with a lot of different weapons. Kenny Golladay, he's got Saquon Barkley coming back. Got Kyle Rudolph, Evan Ingram at tight end. So he's got playmakers at every position. And plus, he's a dual threat quarterback too, with his rushing yards. And I know you're probably thinking about the image where he runs, trips over his feet and falls, but hey, he still accumulates a lot of rushing yards. So I think Daniel Jones is a really great target as a QB2 in 2 quarterback formats or super flex. So that's one. You look at running backs. I know everyone's enamored by DAndre Swift. Look at what he was able to do last year. DAndre Swift's great. He's going to be a bell cow. No, he's not. They brought in, Jamal Williams. They signed him for a reason to that contract. And I think he'll play a very vital part, in that backfield. You've got Anthony Lynn that's coming in from the LA Chargers. He's coming into that offense, and like historically, like he has given running backs, whether it's like a pass attempt, via a target, or, like a touch, rushing attempt. He's given running backs like a high percentage of touches year in and year out. And so I think Jamal Williams is someone that you can draft as a very solid wide receiver, or not wide receiver, excuse me, running back 3, who has like significant upside. And I think the committee between DAndre Swift and Jamal Williams is going to be more of like a 50-50 committee. So if you look at like wide receiver, I know everyone loves Dallas. They love Dak Prescott. They love Zeke Elliott. They love Amari Cooper. Everyone's obsessed with CeeDee Lamb. But I would say don't forget about a guy like Michael Gallup too. I think you've got 3 receivers there that can easily exceed like 100 targets in Dallas. And Michael Gallup is one of them. And if you look back to last year, and I know they went through a carousel of quarterbacks, but last year alone, Michael Gallup ended up leading all the Dallas receivers in receiving air yards last year. And so I think he's another one that's really positioned for a monster season that's really dirt cheap if you look at, like ADP and where he's being drafted. And I would just round it out with tight ends. Let me think here for a moment on tight ends. I know one guy I really like quite a bit is Noah Fant. I think a lot of people are kind of forgetting about him, thinking about, whether Teddy Bridgewater is going to start, Drew Lock, what is that going to look like? But I think it's really a prime opportunity for Fant, to take a step forward, especially with that offense having Cortland Sutton coming back, terrorizing defenses. You've got Jerry Jeudy that's there. So I think those 2 receivers combined are really going to open things up even more underneath for Noah Fant. So just to round that out and bring that all together, hey, there's some sleepers for you, Paul.
I love it. The thing I'll say is, what the hell are the Detroit Lions doing? I wish this was the first time I could say that. But, like, you got DAndre Swift, you're like, okay, he's the guy. Then they get Jamal Williams. You're like, okay, that's weird. And then all of a sudden we keep hearing these rumors, yeah, Todd Gurley looks good. What the hell? What about DAndre Swift? Why do they keep ignoring? Why'd you draft him that high? I just don't understand, Eric. What's going on?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm like, the first domino drop, like with Jamal Williams, and you look at his body of work with the Packers. I'm like, he was very productive given the limited number of opportunities, but it's just with Jared Goff there at, under center, they're going to lean on these running backs quite a bit, not only as rushers, but also as receivers. It may be one of those things we can't quantify, like with an advanced metric or stat, just for where they may be concerned about DAndre Swift's like injury history, with the concussions, him being able to be used like as like a bell cow. And maybe it's not the best thing to give the guy 20, 25 touches or opportunities a game. It's maybe it's better to give him more, like anywhere from 13 to 16, and then have the other guys do some of the work. So I think it could be a lot of factors combined that we're just not privy to. But again, they signed Williams for a reason. And I at least have that backfield projected to be a little bit more 50-50 than people think. So.
And on your Daniel Jones point, if he doesn't do it now, I don't know when the heck he's going to do it, because they got the whole offense. It is absolutely loaded. All right, let's go to the other side. Tell me guys you hate, guys you despise, guys, whether it's the ADP, whether it's a player, and you're like, oh, that guy's not going to be 10 feet near my roster. Who are those?
Wow.
Who should we stay away from?
Guys that I hate or don't like. I'm thinking about like if quarterbacks, like real quick. I'll tell you, someone like Jared Goff, immediately comes to mind. I'm like, he's away from the Sean McVay, cozy blanket, keeping him warm. He's been cast aside, and I just have very low expectations for him. That's in Detroit, so he's someone that I'm not really aggressively targeting on really any of my fantasy teams. If you look at running back, let me think there for a second. Guys that I hate. That's such a strong word. I would say J.K. Dobbins is someone I'm not aggressively targeting. It's like, I know he was phenomenal, like with the touches and opportunities that he had last year, but he's not really being positioned to be like a bell cow, like in my opinion. You're still going to have Lamar Jackson that's there, that's still going to get his fair share, of rushing attempts. But you also have Gus Edwards that's there that a lot of people forget about, like who's a very capable running back, still very young, still very capable. So I think he's going to get more opportunities than many people think. And I'm thinking of like another back too. I would say, David Johnson.
Yes, he's on that list. Ugh.
I know a lot of people are thinking, okay, well, he's the starter for the Texans. I know there's a lot of uncertainty at the quarterback position, just given Deshaun Watson's legal situation in the investigation, like off the field. But, regardless of who's under center, David Johnson will still be the starter. I'm like, he's past his prime athletically, is very inefficient on the touches that he got last year. Then you've got Mark Ingram that's coming in, similar situation with him. If I'm going to target that backfield, I'd rather just roll the dice with the upside with a guy like Philip Lindsay. So I would say David Johnson, is another one. Let me think of one more. I'll give you one more, a pretty big name, and I'll try to hit on some receivers if we have time.
Sure.
I would say one running back is, I know Josh Jacobs. Again, it's a similar scenario to like DAndre Swift. They brought in Kenyon Drake for a reason on a deal that has a lot of guaranteed money on it. And they've got some, vacated targets that are there. They've got some, available rushing attempts. But I think we're looking at a scenario like in Detroit for where Kenyon Drake and Josh Jacobs are going to get an eerily similar number of opportunities this year. And so it's that scenario, if you're looking at it from an opportunity cost, why spend the ADP or the draft position to get Jacobs where you can just wait to get Drake like a little bit later. And so that's kind of how I look at that scenario. If you're looking at wide receiver, let me think here for a moment. Guys that I hate,
despise. You don't want them anywhere near. Yeah, hate, that extreme word. Yeah.
That I just despise, where I'm like, I don't want this guy. And it's tough because I really love receivers, but I want to give you a name. I would say one is DJ Moore. Is DJ Moore, because a lot of people are excited. Hey, we got Sam Darnold that's there. We got stability at quarterback. Yay for DJ Moore. But I think that the issue is that you got a guy that's being drafted later in Robbie Anderson that's just as capable. Had a career season. He's getting reunited with Sam Darnold, and it's a scenario where I have projected at least DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson getting essentially the same amount of targets. DJ Moore may have like a few more, but it's obviously less than 10. And so that's someone you can get that has just as much upside. That's a little bit less expensive than DJ Moore. So I know that's one receiver. I would say another one, which again, hate is such a strong word. It just depends on opportunity cost for me. But I would say like T. Higgins. I know a lot of people are, thinking, okay, Jamar Chase, he's going to get his targets. You still have T. Higgins that's there. But I'm just thinking, if T. Higgins is still on the board, I would rather just wait later in my draft just to get Tyler Boyd instead. Because he's going to, all those receivers are going to get a similar amount of targets. And they're all going to exceed 100 plus targets. I'd rather just wait and get a guy like Tyler Boyd, like a little bit later. And let me see. I'll try to think of one more, but you want to chime in too, Paul?
The thing I would love to jump in here, Eric, is first off, I have a quick question. So just tell me whichever side you're on, and then it'll lead into this. If you had to categorize yourself, you had to label yourself, are you an analytical guy or a touchy-feely guy? Like you let all kinds of other factors kind of sway you as you're going through a draft. So if you had to label yourself one or the other, one camp or the other, which side are you on?
I'm more of an analytical guy because it makes me think about like when you're analyzing like a stock, if you're looking at like fundamental analysis or technical analysis, because you're looking at a company for fundamentals. It's like, well, this company sells this, they sell that, their balance sheet is great, and their earnings per share, is this. I really like this company. Your mind can weave like a narrative about why you like this company or this player. But I think that the analytical side, like with the stats, you really can't. That really can't lie to you, because there's stats that are predictive, like for quarterbacks, passing yards per game, for running backs, it's all about opportunities, rushing attempts and targets, wide receivers, targets, air yards, those things are pretty predictive. And so I'm like that, it is what it is. I'm like, that receiver either got the targets or they did not. Now, if there's something substantial that's changing in their situation, saying that, okay, player A is going to get more targets this year, that's something to factor in. But I try not to make more of like an emotional decision. Like if I'm drafting, in many cases, I'm using my positional tiers. I've done the research before. Let that research dictate on how you draft based on how your opponents are drafting, because that's where you're going to get some value. So that's just the approach that I would take. So I would say, to answer your question, Paul, more analytical.
Okay, phenomenal. Because that leads
Hmm.
me to my next question here.
Hmm.
Have you been burned before? Do you have battle scars? Like, let's just say, for instance, unfortunately, I have one of these. Kenyon Drake in the first round at the end of the round a couple years ago. I'm like, oh. And then after whatever happened that year, I'm like, you know what? No, Drake, you're off the board. I'm not even going to touch you anymore because I've been burned by you before. Do you allow that to happen? Or with the analytics, hey, man, I predicted this was going to happen. This didn't. No skin off my back. It just didn't happen. Oh, well, that's what the number said it was going to happen. It didn't happen. Or do you get some sort of emotional attachment where you say, this is going to be the guy, and then he blows it for you? He's just an anchor on your team for none of the good reasons, just drags your team down to the bottom of the ocean, and you're like, you know what? Next year, you're off the list for at least a year or 2 years or whatever the list is. Have you been burned by players before? If so, feel free to share any of them. And if you have, how long are they in the doghouse? Forever?
Yeah.
A year or two? What is it?
I think we've all been we've all been burned by players for where we're just like, yeah, I felt like this player was going to have a really good season. All the research suggested that that he would, and it just doesn't happen. So I just kind of scrap it and just reevaluate going into this upcoming season to see, okay, will things be a little bit different for this player this year, like yes or no, and just kind of write out like the argument, almost like you're an attorney, and just take it from there. But if they had a bad season, it's not going to sway me either way, saying, okay, I'm not going to draft that player again, because I ended up getting burned. Again, just let the process, take you, kind of take you to the finish line. But I know one that really came to mind that really like hurt me like many years ago is like, I just remember when like Chad Johnson signed like with the Patriots way back then. I was like, oh, this is going to be great. He's catching balls like from Tom Brady. Hey, I like where his ADP's at. I'm going to draft this guy. That did not work out well. So that is one that really sticks out to me, saying, wow, that was like a missed opportunity. Just didn't happen.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. Again, I need that mentality like in my life, just in case horrible things happen to me. I'm like, up, just clean the slate board. It's a new year, new opportunity. Let's just lay it on the line. Eric, I need you as my new motivational life coach.
That's, I can be your life coach. Think of me as your fantasy football consigliere. I got you.
Yeah, see, there you go. And that's why you're worth a follow. Look him up, Eric Moody, on all social media platforms. And let's go into this. To finish this off, I want to break down a typical first-round redraft league, and I want to talk about all the different points that exist in a first-round or redraft league. What's the upper echelon? Who are like, hey, these top 5 running backs, top 6, whatever your echelon elite tier is, of like these guys are blue-chip players. You should feel great about drafting them. And then where's the drop-off? So let's start there in the first round.
Okay, yeah, I'm just thinking, let me think like with ADP here real quick. Give me a second.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm just thinking if you're going through like a draft, okay, obviously you got the first pick, right?
Sure.
You got your first pick. I'm like, you've got your upper tier of players and running backs. Obviously Christian McCaffrey. So I think if you're looking like in the first round, like you got your Christian McCaffreys, you've got your Dalvin Cooks, you've got your Derrick Henry, your Alvin Kamara. That's essentially going to be kind of your upper echelon first tier of players just in general, like to draft.
Okay.
Then you go to that next tier. You're looking at like Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley, like Nick Chubb, like Jonathan Taylor. Like if you look at all those running backs, are all going to see like a high number of touches in their backfield. They're gonna dominate, opportunity share, all those different metrics and like snaps played and everything there. But I think if you're past those players in the latter part of the first round, I would seriously look at like a wide receiver like Tyreek Hill or like a Travis Kelce, because you're going to be able to, on the back end of the first round, kind of when the turn takes place in the second round, to be able to get, like a running back, like whether it's like Aaron Jones or like a Cam Akers or an Austin Eckler, running backs that are going to command like a high number of opportunities per game. And so that's where I would kind of look at those players. Now someone that's really kind of has people scratching their heads because of the uncertainty of Aaron Rodgers is like Devontae Adams. I'm like, in many cases, like his ADP is dropped to like the early part of like the second round. I mean, you're looking at like Devontae Adams, you're looking at like Stephon Diggs, he's also there. And then running backs, you're looking at like Antonio Gibson, Joe Mixon, Najee Harris. They're going to be kind of in that next tier, that third tier of like running backs. Wide receivers, I would say you've got Hill, Adams, and Diggs in kind of that tier 1. I'm like, you want to grab one of those players. The next tier, that's where you're going to have like your DK Metcalfs, your DeAndre Hopkins, and I would even say like with Calvin Ridley too. I'm not as Calvin Ridley like crazy as others that are out there. It's like it's a little bit different. And I know we have a sample size of 5 or 6 games last year for where going into each game saying that, hey, I'm the number one guy. Defensive coordinators are going to scheme to take me out of the game. And it may take him some time to kind of adjust to that. And it's a little bit different running like side by side with Julio Jones. It's like, okay, I'm Batman now. My Robin is like Russell Gage. I'm going to battle with Russell Gage here. Or you could even say, hey, it may be, maybe Kyle Pitts, which that's really where my projections are telling me. But still, it's a lot of uncertainty there. Rookie getting acclimated to the NFL. He may not be the Robin you expect like initially. So a little bit more risk there than a lot of people are willing to talk about. Hopefully that answers your question about kind of how to approach that first round, kind of how to tier certain players and everything there.
And a quick detour, Kyle Pitts, he's a guy that obviously the tight end market in fantasy football, it's the elite and then a bunch of other guys that you just kind of throw darts at and see what happens. But Kyle Pitts intrigues me. I know there's a history, if we're looking at the analytics. Rookie tight ends normally don't do very well. But again, Kyle Pitts, he's the sexy thing of the moment. Prisoner of the moment. I'm like, oh, maybe I could be the first guy on Kyle Pitts. Everyone wants to be the first guy on things. Is Kyle Pitts worth the ADP? I see that he's risen. Maybe he'll fall back down. He's been kind of all over the place. Is the juice worth the squeeze, as Dave Gettleman said?
Is the juice worth the squeeze? I like that. I would say it is if you want to draft a tight end early, mainly off of projected like target volume, because you look at Pitts, I'm like, I think his floor is like 100 targets, but I'm like, he could easily have around 120. I'm like, he's siphoning targets away from Russell Gage, like essentially. So I'm like, it could happen. I'm like, I could easily see him finish with around like 900 receiving yards, like 6 touchdowns or 7 touchdowns. I think his success or failure, if he can crack into like that, like top 3, is really going to be with touchdowns. So if he can even sniff close to like double-digit touchdowns, like that's going to help him out a lot. But the targets will be there, and also the receiving yards. I would say like another tight end too, whose ADP has really crept up, is like T.J. Hawkinson. So I think his is like in the late 5th, like early like 6th round. I would just say if you miss out, like obviously on Kelsey, like Waller or Kittle, I mean, you can always say, okay, I'll take Pitts. If you just want to take a tight end early that's seeing like a lot of targets and build on that, you can. But I think another alternative is just to wait. If you wait to the 8th, 9th, or 10th round, I'm like, I would be very comfortable going to battle like in my redraft league with like Logan Thomas or like Dallas Goedert, and they're available like in the 8th or 9th round. Or like even a guy like Noah Fant, I'm like, he's available like in the 13th round if you're looking at like 12-team like PPR format. So there's some other viable options that are available like a little bit later. I just think that we're drafting Pitts like at his ceiling. And so that's really where the risk comes in making that like emotional type of decision. Again, your mind will weave like a narrative on why, but it's just, if you look at it logically, it's like, do I really want to spend a 5th round pick on a guy like Pitts, where I can easily wait for like Logan Thomas, Goddard, or some others later in the draft and still have a very similar value?
All right, last one before we get you out of here, Eric. Quarterbacks, okay? Everyone, there's a lot of crazy crap that happens in a bunch of leagues that I'm in. I've seen Mahomes, the Lamar Jackson go incredibly high. You're like, what in God's green earth? And then you have other guys that get these late steals in round 13, 14. While Cam Newton did work out for some of those people last year, still, that's like an example. What's your strategy on quarterbacks? Are you a guy that says, hey, man, wait, there are plenty of quarterbacks to go? Or are you a guy that says, hey, if there's an opportunity to get a Dak attack here or a Lamar Jackson there, that you're tempted by the gods to jump in on that? What's the strategy?
Yeah, that's another good question. So I wrote like an article on this actually at Pro Football Network around like, drafting a quarterback early. Like what does your team look like, and how should you build a team if you plan on doing that? And I just think a lot of people are so conditioned now, with late round quarterback and with that strategy. And it's a very viable strategy. So nothing against the strategy. I'm like, with JJ Zacharyson, where he put that together, I'm like, it was groundbreaking. It's phenomenal. But I think we're at a point now for where if you've got a lot of people adapting to that strategy and are conditioned to do it, that's where you can get some value on a guy like Mahomes or Josh Allen or Kyler Murray, or to your point, Dak, or even like Lamar Jackson, for where you may not necessarily be drafting them at their ADP, but if you're sitting there in the 4th or 5th round and like Mahomes is there, why not take Mahomes, given, his passing yards per game and PPR, or not PPR, but fantasy points per game, like over the last like 3 seasons? Why not? It really gives you a competitive advantage each week. And on the flip side, you don't have to worry about streaming. You don't have to worry about using your waiver wire priority or, or fab, like on a quarterback. You've got someone that's very stable there where you're going to get the production. So I think it's a lot of value in taking one early. If they drop like a round or two on ADP, you just kind of go with the flow. Use your research, use your tiers going into the draft. But I think if you were looking to take one, I want to take one like a little bit later. I think a guy like Jalen Hurts or Matthew Stafford, going for those two, like at their ADP, like in 12-team formats, it's around like the 7th round. I think they're legitimate candidates to finish as like top 4 fantasy QBs this year, just given their specific situations.
All right, Eric, before we get you out of here, tell everybody, all our listeners, all our viewers, where they can find you, where they can jump on the Eric Moody hype train.
Perfect. I'll do that. Yeah. And again, thanks, Paul, for the invite. Hey, this was a blast. We'll have to do it again soon. But, as Paul mentioned, I'm a senior fantasy analyst over at Pro Football Network, and I create written, audio and video fantasy football content. You look at Pro Football Network as a whole, we're the primary voice of pro football. We create a ton of content around like all the latest NFL news, rumors, analysis, regarding fantasy football, betting, NFL draft, college football, and much, much more. So you can check us out at profootballnetwork.com, and you can check me out on Twitter at Eric N. Moody. I'm always happy to interact, with those that follow me and answer questions. So I look forward to chatting with each and every one of you soon. But hey, thanks again, Paul.
Yeah, Eric, thank you so much for joining us, man. Appreciate it. And I'm sure this won't be the last time. Thanks, bud.
No, not a problem at all. Thank you.